Hello everyone, welcome to today's IS NTU Discovery Science Seminar. Today we are welcome to introduce Dr. Zeng Zhiwei from, she is a presidential postdoc fellow working in the joint NTU-UBC Research Center for Excellence in Active Living for the Elderly. Dr. Zeng's research interests including explainable artificial intelligence, augmentation-based decision-making, and application of explainable AI in the assessment and intervention of neurodegenerative diseases and other medical scenarios. She received her double degree in engineering and business from NTU and was awarded the Colwyn Scholar Award. During her PhD in NTU, her awards include Best Paper Presentation Award at the AAAI and the Best Student Paper Award at the International Conference on Crop Science and Engineering, as well as the International Conference on Ageless Aging. So today's topic will be the AI-empowered monitoring and intervention of neurodegenerative diseases in community settings. So let's welcome Dr. Chen.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Zhiwei. Actually, I find out that we have the same names, and then they tell me, Zhiwei, I'll be introducing you, and then, I'm introducing myself. So I have a lot of long titles, like related to my lab and related to my talk. So what I noticed from the registration list, I think we have a very diverse audience here. So we have you from SCSE, EEE, and MSE, also from SBS, CBE, KC, a lot, so I don't list. So I guess in this talk, it wouldn't be really helpful for me to really go into the AI algorithms or dive into the models, because to many of you that may not really make too much sense. So what I'm going to try to do is to focus on why we do this, and what are some of the obstacles that we are faced, and how do we approach those obstacles. And I will also be happy to take any of your questions related to interdisciplinary research in question and answer phase. So let me just start on this part. And this is the agenda for today. So today I will start with some general background, like setting the tones for the talk. Like what is the global aging situation, where does Singapore stand? And then I'll also introduce the reasons why we tend to focus on all this research in a community setting, and why we choose to focus on neurodegenerative diseases. And with that, I'll go into some of our specific projects, just to give you an example what kind of research we are doing. And the examples I'm using will be focusing on dementia and Parkinson's disease. And then to end my talk, I want to share with you my perspective on what kind of roles AI can take in healthcare. So that's the whole plan for today. You can just sit back, because it won't be a really tense wise. But I hope you can go through the whole process with me. It's really the thinking process. So what is the problem, and what are the issues we are facing, and how we should be approaching them. I guess you've been hearing about global aging quite many times, because that's one of the main themes that has been mentioned by the government, public agencies over the time, and especially in recent few years. But I would like to still show you this diagram, because I think it contains a lot of information and it's really intuitive. So you can see that the color of the shades actually represents the average age in that region. So the darker the orange, that means the larger the average age of the population within that area. So if you look at this diagram, then there are two general things you might tend to notice. The first is that from 1950 to 2010, these are 60 years, and this is also 50 years. But you can see that the rate, the shape is changing much faster. So we are aging much faster than before. And the second trend you may notice in the third diagram is that the darker regions are mostly in Europe and also in Asia. So it's quite obvious in Asia, partly because many of the increasing population are coming from the developing countries. So exactly where does Singapore stand? So if we take a closer look at ASEAN countries, so this is where Singapore is at. So in 2050, together with Thailand, Singapore will be into the ultra-aged tier. So like Malaysia will stay at the aged tier in 2050. So even that Singapore has a relatively small population, but the Singapore population is one of the fastest aging populations in the world. And just to give you a little bit more sense, in more specific numbers, how that is related to us and exactly how much impact that has, we take a look at this set of statistics. So in year 2000, there are 1 in 14 seniors aged 65 and above. So it's 1 in 14 in 2000. And then in year 2015, this number becomes 1 in 8. And then in the year 2030, which is 7 years to come, this number will become 1 in 4. So that's how significant it is. So that means when you look around yourself in the year 2030, 1 in 4 will be aged 65 and above. That's how serious the problem is. And now we take a look at what kind of approaches Singaporean government and the society are taking towards our aging population. So this is a very general landscape of the senior care in Singapore. I didn't list all the facilities just to give you an example. So we have care facilities and schemes from the home-based part to like more region-based, and also from palliative care to wellness. So let's say, for example, for palliative care, we have hospice home care and inpatient hospice care. And in terms of medical care, we have like hospitals in the region, polyclinics in the community, dementia home care, and other home therapies in home. And when we come to personal care, we have like day rehab center and nursing home, sheltered home for the aged. And for wellness programs, we have, like, say, for example, neighboring befriending services, senior activity center, and community wellness club. So if you really pay attention to government policies, you will know that in recent years, with the aim of providing better care to all the people living in Singapore as our population age, the Ministry of Health has launched three transformational shifts in our care structure. So they are called the 3 Beyonds. I guess some of you may know. So the first beyond is to go beyond quality to value. So it's to provide valuable, affordable health care to our people while keeping our healthcare system sustainable. And the second beyond is to go beyond hospitals to communities. So they want to provide care in communities which are closer to people's homes. And the third beyond is to go beyond healthcare to health. So they want people to live an active and healthy lifestyle instead of doing reactive healthcare. So if we put this beyond to our landscape over here, then go beyond hospital to community is basically want to shift from the right side to the left side of the spectrum. And to go beyond healthcare to health is we want to move from the upper part of the spectrum to the bottom part. But what actually happens is that even though we have many new facilities and new schemes coming up out of the years, but the situation is that more attention tends to be paid to both ends of the care spectrum. So the care at the community level has received less attention. And we also have more facilities and programs for medical care, while there's less of them for personalized care and wellness. So that is an important reason why we focus our research and efforts at the community level. So besides that, I also want to introduce you a little bit to neurodegenerative disease. So neurodegenerative disease, basically we refer to all type of diseases in which cells of the brain or cells of the central nervous system stop working or they die. So this may affect, because you know that if it affects our brains, so if it affects many of our body activities such as mobility, coordination, cognition, and it may even affect basic functions like heart beating and breathing. So that's how severe it can be. And what happens is that for most of the neurodegenerative diseases, the greatest risk factor for them is aging. So as you age, the risk of you getting these diseases becomes much greater. And the other fact related to all these neurodegenerative diseases is that they generally have no cure. So they cannot be cured. So there are many researchers, doctors, they are still trying to study the pathology of these kind of diseases, but it is not yet that clear. That's why at current point of time, we cannot come up with like surgeries or medications that can 100% help us to cure them. We can stop the progress, but we cannot cure them. That's why in this kind of context, doing early detection and early intervention is very, very important. Because we cannot cure them and they cannot be reversed, so what we can do is to find out them at the earliest point as possible and try to stop them. That's why a large part of our work focuses on the early detection and early intervention of neurodegenerative diseases. So dementia and Parkinson's disease are two of the most common neurodegenerative disease, and these are the two topics I want to show you as an example today as well. So with that, I will go into some of our research efforts in monitoring and intervention of dementia. So firstly, I also want to share with you some of the information or what is the impact of dementia. So again, this diagram here shows the people living with dementia around the world, and this is actually statistics from 2015. It's a bit outdated, but I find this diagram more interesting, so I couldn't find more better infograms in recent years, so I used this one. So as you can see, the first trend is, of course, in the world, this is aligned with the increasing senior population that we have, because I mentioned that age is one of the biggest risk factors of neurodegenerative diseases. So as we have more aged population, then the population of people living with dementia is also increasing. And the second trend you may also notice is that, in Asia we have the most people living with dementia, partly because we have a large population in Asia as well. And a little bit more facts about dementia. So around the world, 10 million new cases of dementia will be diagnosed each year. So as I'm talking, as I'm finishing this sentence, 2 or 3 new cases are diagnosed, because according to statistics, every 3 seconds there is a new dementia case. And in 2018, dementia has become a $1 trillion disease. And in the year 2030, it will cost USD $2.8 trillion. That's how it will cost the society and the healthcare system. And what is the sad fact about it is actually, it is approximated that 3/4 of the patient with dementia remains undiagnosed. So they have the disease, but over the years, they don't even know, or they are not diagnosed with dementia, and this population is 3/4. So they have not received a formal diagnosis, also means that they will have no access to the treatment and organized care and support. That's why we find it's really important that we have a way, a bit earlier. So before I go into the project, I also want to correct some of the common misconceptions that we may have towards dementia. So the first one is dementia is a part of normal aging process, because we always have an impression that as we age, we tend to be forgetful. But it is actually not the case. So dementia is not a normal part of the healthy aging, and it's not inevitable. And in fact, 40% of the cases may have been prevented or delayed if we do serious control of the risk factors. And the second misconception is that dementia is only about forgetfulness. But that isn't true, because dementia is more than forgetfulness. It can evenly impact all the cognitive functions all the way from the bottom, including attention, processing speed, to language, visual, spatial, all the way to executive function. So it impacts all of the cognitive functions. But we tend to have an impression that it's only related to memory, because memory symptoms are the most obvious. But it's not the case. And the third one is that dementia can be diagnosed in one visit, like our cough, COVID, or other type of diseases. You just go for one scan and then the doctor will tell you, yeah, you're positive. But generally it's not the case because there is no single test that we can use to diagnose dementia. And diagnosis is often based on a lot of things like biomarkers, neuropsychological tests, and neuroimaging. So that is why we find it's really important if we want to reach the 3/4 of undiagnosed people and to avoid having them to have to visit doctors at a very frequent pace. So that's why in our project, we developed a mobile-based clock drawing test for detecting early signs of dementia. So this is in collaboration with Alibaba Health, and we have a team supporting this effort. And part of my slides on this section on clock drawing test is coming from Hong Chao's slides. So what we are doing is a quick screening test. So it has no means to replace the diagnosis process because the diagnosis process is long and sophisticated. So we just want to use this quick screening test to identify high-risk individuals. And we built an automated clock drawing test that runs on a mobile platform. Hopefully it can enable convenient large-scale screening at minimal cost. So the clock drawing test is very simple. It's basically the clinician will ask the patient to draw a clock, and also they will specify a time. Maybe you draw a clock showing 11:20, or you draw a clock showing 3:40, something like that. And the clock drawing test will be able to detect mental decline, as people with dementia often have problems reading traditional clocks. And reading and drawing clocks, even it seems to be a simple thing to us, but it actually requires cognitive functions such as executive functioning, visual spatial ability, motor programming, and attention. So these are some of the clocks. So healthy people may draw a clock like this. Alzheimer's people, which is dementia people, may draw a clock like this. And Parkinson's disease patients may draw a clock like this. But you may still have a question. It's just drawing a clock, how hard it can be. And I'll just show you. So this is a dementia patient drawing a clock.
A little bit larger. And all the numbers on it. And set the hands for 11:10.
You can notice that she cannot even close the loop or a circle. And she needs to think for a long while when she's putting down the numbers.
What are
She
you
writes
thinking about? What are you
2
going to do next?
And there's no way she's drawing it in an organized way. So that's how hard it can be for a dementia patient, even it appears to be so simple for us. So the platform we have built for this one is also simple and straightforward. So basically there's an interface for you to draw, and then we will provide rating based on how good you draw.
A very classic cognitive test for both dementia and PD. It requires the test subject to draw a clock at a specific time. The length and position of the hands, the complement of the 12 digits, and the outline of the clock are all part of features to be extracted.
Clinical diagnoses are also recorded
Yeah, it comes in
and
different
used as
languages.
labels for training our approach in the future stage. The system then proceeds to generate a time for the test subject to draw. Once the subject is done drawing, our system analyzes the image and outputs a final score based on the quality of the drawing.
So basically you can see that the interface is really simple. There's nothing hard to develop an application that can ask people to draw, and then you take down all their drawings, record all the data points. So what really the hard part is how you can provide a feasible rating, or how do you rate and how do you evaluate a hand-drawn clock. So some of you may say, oh, you are doing SESE and computer science and AI, so why don't you add some machine learning? And the thing is, most of machine learning algorithms, they are data-driven. And basically what you are doing is that you are teaching a child. You show them a lot of examples and teaching them, oh, this is good clock, this is bad clock. And then they will learn the association of what is a good clock, what is a bad clock. So which is the hard thing about this one is, where does the training data come from? So you know that if you do social research or biomedical research, any kind of study you do, you collect data from patients, you need to do IRB. And how can I find so many patients in Singapore who are able to join my study, and how long would that take? So that's one of the major problems that we are faced when we are trying to evaluate the clock. So then we come up with something quite interesting. So if we don't have data, then we create data ourselves. So what our team did was that we created a synthetic data set by combining the online data sets. So one of them was the Google Quick Draw. So it's basically an online platform for hand-drawn doodles collected by Google, and it's collected in the form of online games. So basically, it's also a very good example of doing crowdsourcing research. So you want a set of hand-drawn doodles by human, then you just ask human to help you to do it. So let me just show you how that is done. So that is on my computer, and I'm drawing with my cursor, so you have to bear with my poor drawing.
I see wishbone,
And you can see that as I draw, the AI is guessing.
or saw, or leafy tree. Oh, I know, it's angel. I see shoe, or swimming pool, or hockey puck. Oh, I know, it's bathtub. I see street light, or palm tree, or stethoscope, or bear. Oh, I know, it's mermaid.
Yeah, I didn't know how it figures out that's a mermaid because my drawing was really poor. But you get the sense. So basically they give you a certain word and then you draw according to the word, and then in the back end they are collecting all the doodles you are drawing. So basically what we did was we take the doodle under the clock category. So we have all kinds of clock face drawn by people like me playing the game in my leisure time. It's still online. You can just Google Quick Draw, and then you can start drawing, and you will be guessing. Then we have the clock face. And then the digits in the clock are coming from a famous CV dataset. It's a large database of handwritten digits from all the way from 0 to 9, although 9 is not shown here. But so basically, now we have the digits, and now we have the clock face, and then we use that to assemble a synthetic clock. So in more specific details, so we extract the clock outline from the Quick Draw dataset, so we take out the outline, and then we will get the adequate position for each digit, and we will first set a centroid, and then the digit will be set on a certain angle where we go around the centroid. And then we will fill with the number from the hand-drawn number dataset, and then we'll also generate clock hands. So we have different type of clock hands, and then we will just assemble. So at this point in time, it's still a decent clock, so we will also add some noise, like changing the position of the digits, and like enlarge or shrink and twist, so on and so forth, so adding some noise. So at the end, what we have is a synthetic data set of a hand-drawn clock with good, medium, and bad quality according to some clinical scoring criteria. So this can be used to train the algorithms that we have. So these are our generated clock set, even though it's still not a large one, but it's large enough to help us to train a decent machine learning algorithm. So the next step is to develop something that can evaluate how good the clock is. So typically it will be done in 3 steps, how we evaluate a hand-drawn clock. So first we do segmentation. We segment the different parts. So which part is the clock face, which part is the digit, and which part is the clock hand. So you can see that here we have the hand already labeled. And after we segment, we will recognize. So maybe you'll be able to see here. So all these green, small green numbers and the words are our recognition results. So here it shows that this is a 12, and this is minute hand, this is hour hand. And then we will do the scoring based on clinical criteria, like For example, how good are the digits placed? Are all 12 digits present? And whether the clock is showing the correct time, so on and so forth. So basically, we will do it in 3 steps. So the first approach we are taking is called DB-scan. So don't worry about the name. Basically, it's an algorithm that can do density-based clustering. And it is good at separating the clusters with different size and things. So you can see in the GIF, it's already clustering. That's the outside boundary, the mouth, and the eyes. So it tends to group the points with spatial vicinity together. And what we are doing is that we are using both temporal and spatial information. Because when you are drawing the clock, you draw it in strokes. And the dots in the first, in the same stroke, they tend to have closer temporal proximity. That's why we use both temporal and spatial information to do clustering. So something good about it, about using DB-scan, is that we can segment these joint parts together. So you might not be able to see the green ones here, but you can see this one. So this is the clustering results, and the same color denotes the same cluster. So you can see that even for numbers like 10, 11, and 12, like say for 11, I may write the 2 ones in 2 strokes. But because the time is in close proximity, then I'll be able to tell that these two ones, they are together, they are forming one cluster, and it's easier for us to recognize that it's 11. And more obviously, another example is 12. So it's much better if I group them together. Otherwise, I don't know what is the individual 1, 2, or is together the 12. So that's one good thing about DB-scan. It can help me to join the disjoint part together. And the second good thing with it is sometimes if you write the numbers really large, there may be unintentional overlap, and the numbers may be crammed together. And if I use normal CV algorithms, if they're overlapped, I couldn't tell that there are different parts. But because in DB-scan, I'm doing clustering also based on temporal information. So let's say here, the 10 and 9, even if they are overlapped, but because they are written in different time, so if I take in the temporal information, I will know there are different clusters. But there are also problems with this one. So typically, DB-scan might not be so good if there are some stray strokes. So this is also something we discovered when we start to collect data from real users. So people tend to draw clock in different ways, and some of them, they will draw the ticks. And what happens is that DB-scan tend to take the ticks as one cluster as well. So as you can see here, this tick is recognized as 1, and this tick is recognized as 7. So this will bring difficulty to how we are doing the scoring, because obviously if they do it like this, then there are more than 12 digits. And what else is that temporal information may also be reliable in some cases. Like for example, if the user is writing really slow, and sometimes they are multitasking while they're drawing, then there will be some unintentional or very unnatural pauses. So that's the cases where DB-scan doesn't work. Then we also take a different approach, which is the mask-Gaussian approach. This is a data-driven approach and end-to-end deep learning approach. So we use the synthetic data set we generated to train this one. And what's special about this one and makes it slightly different from its prior CV algorithm is that it has a regional proposal function. So it can determine the bounding box of the objects it's recognizing. Basically, it can segment all the objects out. So it will output the bounding box of the object as well as its class. So that's an end-to-end approach. But the good thing about this one is it will be able to ignore some of the stray strokes. So if you compare, like, this is the same clock which has been drawn with ticks. So you can see that the one that we run with mask-CNN, RCNN, even sometimes it still picks up the ticks as one of the digits, but that's much better than the DB-scan is doing. Basically, DB-scan is picking up every tick. But it also has some disadvantages. So it tends to ignore very small digits. Like here, the 1 and 2 is written very small, and then they are totally ignored. And also, it will break down certain digits into subparts unnecessarily. Like in this case, the 6 over here is actually being broken into 6 and 7. So both of them have some problems. And then what we do is basically, if each of them had a disadvantage, then we just combine them. So we take advantages of both and avoid disadvantages of both. So at the end, what we do is that we do a hybrid approach, and we use DB-scan by default. And you will be automatically switching to mask RCDNN when the number of clusters found by DB-scan is too large. So when the number of clusters found by DB-scan is too large, it basically means there's too many stray strokes. And it's taking out the stray strokes as cluster as well. So in that case, we'll switch into mask RCDNN. So that's how we solve this problem. And so that is about the screening part. So the screening part is basically we want to pick out the high-risk individual. And in the second project that we do related to dementia, what we want to do is long-term monitoring and intervention. So this one is named the ATL Plus Toolkit, and it is supported by the Ministry of Health. They are funding a National Innovation Challenge on combination grant. And of course, we have a very big team, and this is in collaboration with the Tan Tock Seng Hospital. So in this project, we built the world's first digitalized toolkit for longitudinal cognitive monitoring and intervention. So the purpose is to delay the onset of dementia and slowing the progression. So what we did was we take a home plus community model. So that means part of our programs and modules will stay on the users' personal devices, and then they can do it at home on a daily basis. And the other part of the modules will reside in a community setting, like a community center, senior activity center. So there are two reasons of doing so. One is because of the cost. Like some of the modules we have, they might be too costly to be owned by on a per person basis. So we put it in the community center so people can share, and then we can ease out the cost. And the second reason is really because we want to nurture a culture of community support. So what we have discovered in our real user study is that the seniors in community centers, they form small clusters. And after we have deployed our system for a while, and then we go down to check how they're doing, actually there are some seniors that are teaching others how to do so, and they are nudging the others, oh, you should do an exercise today. So that's something we want to see in the community as well, so they can do it as a group, so they have social rapport. And that's one reason we put it in the community as well. So this is one of the home-based modules, the Smart Data Activity. And this is the whole landing module and central coordinator of all the activities we have. It's a smart companion and advice-giving systems. So you can see that you are dispatching the activities that seniors need to do on a daily basis, and also provide a reward-based systems. And this one is showing that we are taking their dietary information. So we have developed like a CV-based algorithm, so they can just take a photo of their dish, and then we can automatically recognize what is the dish that they are taking. And we also take the nutrition information from the HPB, Health Promotion Board database. Like they will tell you how much protein, how much calorie, and how much carbohydrates one chabotel contains. And then basically we recognize first that it's chabotel, and then we ask the user how much portion they eat, and then we calculate the nutrition intake. And then we can provide nutrition recommendation as well. So this is a little bit of competition that we're trying to infuse within the center, so there's a ranking scheme within the center. And the second one that we have is a suite of mini games focusing on cognitive monitoring and assessment. So in this one, the basic idea is that we have many validated cognitive tests. And if you want people to do it on a frequent basis, it cannot be so boring, right? So basically, we try to build or we try to disguise all the clinically validated tests into a serious exercise using gamification. So just make it a little bit more interesting so people can do on a daily basis or a few day basis. And in this one, we also create different scenarios to reflect different type of neuropsychological tests with the aim to cover all the cognitive functions that we have here. So for example, For one of the game, like for the telephone, is covering executive function and memory, and finance is covering processing speed. So basically, what I hope you to get from this slide is that we build a set is because we want the coverage in whole. So these are some of the mini games, the mini series games that we have. Let me just use the laundry game as an example to show you what is the design concept that we are having here. So the laundry game is based on a neuropsychological test called the Stroop test. And in psychology, the Stroop effect is the delay in reaction when we are faced with congruent and incongruent stimuli. And the Stroop test is also widely used for assessing executive function. So let me just give you an example. What do we call as a congruent and incongruent stimuli? So this is a congruent stimuli because you can see that the word has the same meaning as their font color. So red is in red and green is in green. And this is an incongruent stimuli. So the word meaning does not match the font color. You see red in blue font and you see green in orange font. And this is especially more challenging for people who are literate. Because if you are literate, your response to the meaning of the word is much faster than people who are not literate. So generally, this type of incongruent stimuli are more challenging for people who are literate. Because once you look at the word, what reflects in your brain is actually the meaning of that color word instead of the font. Actually, the font color comes the second. So basically, we use this type of Stroop effect to build the laundry game, which is the one I will show you here.
In this game, you will need to sort some laundry based on their color. Tap on the body button to continue. In the first phase, you will need to select the correct laundry based on the spelling of the word. For example, in this demonstration, the first color is spelled green, G-R-E-E-N. Therefore, we need to select the laundry which is green in color.
This is fast forward, so don't worry if you cannot follow.
In the second phase, you will need to select the correct laundry based on the color of the font. For example, in this demonstration, the color is shown with a purple font. Therefore, we need to select the purple colored laundry. In the last phase, the type indicator will change randomly.
And that's where executive functioning comes in. You need to switch between different tasks.
Depending on which type is currently displayed.
Now we fast forward it really fast.
Once the game is completed, your performance will be indicated on the results screen. Tap on the OK button to end the game.
Yeah, the one who's demonstrating is our designer who designed the game. That's why you see he's very fluent. So that's the idea of the laundry game. So you can get the general approach we are taking is firstly we need to decide which area we want to focus on, and then we find whether there's any established clinical test. And then the third part is the design part. How do we convert that into something that is more interesting and more engaging? So the rest is similar. Like for the medication one, it's actually recreating the Benton visual retention test. And basically they need to select the correct dosage and the correct bottle to take medication from. But you might not be able to see clear from here, but all the labels are some visual patterns. And they are not simple visual patterns like circle, triangle, which you can just simply associate semantic meanings with. So there may be some very weird shapes. That means you have to rely on your visual memory instead of semantic memory, because you cannot give a word meaning to the image, and you have to remember how the image is constructed. And then the shopping game is recreating a paired association test. And I can show you here. So you will be showing the content within the box one by one, and some of them contains shapes. And then you'll be asked to find which shape is inside, where the shape is in. And as you go, the number of the boxes and the number of shapes is going to increase. This is fast forward again. Yeah. So there is going to be increasing shapes and increasing boxes, and you need to remember. Sometimes this can be even more difficult if you want to test on visual memory. Then I can, as I mentioned in the medication game, I can use shapes which you cannot associate semantic meaning with. In the demo just now, you saw triangles and shapes because we got feedback that this one is too difficult. And that's why we changed it to easier shapes, but if you want to make it more difficult, you can change it to other meaningless shapes. And then the transportation one is more for visual spatial, and it's recreating a block design. Basically, you need to recreate whatever is shown on the left with 3 blocks on the right. And a few more. So the cooking is for processing speed and attention. And this telephone game is for working memory, like how many digits you can remember, and it's recreating a digit span for word test. So I'm going to show you. So this is just creating a scenario where you need to remember some telephone numbers, but actually they're not real telephone numbers. So you just have to remember and then you type in, so we give a scenario. And of course the length of the number is going to increase. But actually, to our surprise, that you might not be able to guess. So among all the games, most of the seniors do the best with the telephone games. And some of them can get to a number length of 11 and 12, which I myself find challenging as well. And most of them will be able to get around 8 to 9 digits. And if you really think about it, you will be able to find why. Because in real life, they need to remember telephone numbers as well. And our telephone numbers is typically 8 digits. That's why they, because they deal with this type of numbers very frequently in their real life, and we tend to find that they are good with their numerical form of memory rather than visual memory. So they do better than numbers than visual patterns. And yeah, so this is one example of visual patterns. So this delayed recall is a recreation of the C-read word list recognition. And so basically they will be shown 10 images. And then after a few minutes, maybe like around 10 minutes, they will be asked to recall and select from all these images what are the 10 images that they have seen a few minutes ago. And then the finance one is on processing speed, and it's recreating the single-digit modality test. So it's in a scenario that they're trying to decode some of their electricity bills written in a foreign language. So we dedicatedly use some images that they do not know what the semantic meaning is, but if you do know, they are zodiac signs. So basically, we are trying to see how fast they can encode numbers into such patterns. And this is a very good indication of how fast your brain's processing speed is. And this whole suite of games forms the entire virtual AER plus house. And we have something else, like this one, the individual cognitive stimulation therapy. It's based on the cognitive stimulation therapy, but it's in a digital format. So we have many themes like current affairs, food, number games, quiz games. So they are given like quizzes on their smartphones, and they can do it on a daily basis. And we give some of them with the local theme. And these are a bit more photos on the local theme, local themes that we have created. And this is one more focusing on executive functioning and also memory related to digits and sequence. So it's an online iPad version of the trail making test, and the trail making test is also commonly used for cognitive assessment and training. So here, what exactly happens is that this is in the development environment, sorry. So basically, they will be shown a sequence of numbers, exactly four-digit sequence. But the digit will have, firstly they have sequence, and also they are in different colors. So you need to remember 2 types of stimuli. So firstly, which the digit is, and what is the sequence, and also the color stimuli. So sometimes we may give confusing choices, like there are same digits in different colors. So you need to be able to remember 2 types of stimuli. So the last one is a complete shape trial, where they need to alternate between different shapes while they are connecting from 1 all the way to 13. And the last game in this entire cognition ADL Plus toolkit is a physio-cognitive ping pong module. So the reason why we create this module is sometimes your cognitive function is not standing alone. So we want some dual tasking events or exercise. So this is a dual tasking exercise. So we actually use a full body motion sensor. If you play game, you may know the Kinect. And then we use Kinect to track their movement and their actions of their joints and their limbs and their elbows. And then they will be able to play ping pong game without really using a racket. So this is showing the screen that they are seeing. So actually the participant will be standing in front of the screen, and then they will just be able to swing their hand to hit back the ping pong ball. And it's also accompanied with some question answering. So they will be asked to, like, for example, to remember words and to choose the correct words that has been appeared on the screen, and also other questions as well. So like the next one you are going to see is a clock recognition game, and they are also counting back. So those are also digitalized from neuropsychological tests. So the idea is that we digitalize all the tests that they can do, maybe in a clinical environment, but now because it's in a digitalized format, then they can be easily deployed into the community centers or on the user's mobile phones, and then they can use it. So we actually did a study, community study, and it's by far the largest longitudinal study that we do in Asia related to using AI technologies for assessment and intervention of dementia. So we went to all these community centers, there are 9 of them, involving 152 participants, and they have done 6 months intervention plus 3 months follow-up. So these are some of the photos showing our seniors interacting with our ADL Plus toolkit. And in the end, after the 6 months and 6 months intervention and 3 months follow-up, we found significant interventional benefit in the intervention group compared to the control group in both cognitive performance and in the quality of life. I think in the interest of time, I may need to go a little bit faster in this part, but this part is shorter than the previous one. So just as another example, I also want to show you some of the work that we have done in monitoring and assessment of Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease is also the second most common neurodegenerative disease, just after dementia. And there are more than 10 million people with Parkinson's disease worldwide, and almost 100% of the treatments are symptomatic. That means they are basically used to control the symptoms, but they cannot really cure the disease. And actually, there are 1 in 100 over 60 years old are affiliating with Parkinson's disease. And one more thing that is more interesting is that men are more likely to get Parkinson's disease than women. But they haven't really found out why yet exactly, but maybe it has something to do with the genetic part. And in Parkinson's disease, it often occurs when nerve cells or neurons in the area of the brain that controls the movement becomes impaired or die. So there are a type of brain cells in your brain they can produce an important brain chemical called dopamine, and that is the chemical used to control something related to motor functions. So if you have Parkinson's disease, then you may have bradykinesia. So that means you may have masked face, decreasing thinking, and also vocal symptoms, rigidity and postural instability. So how it looks like, and the most obvious symptom is tremor. So this patient is having both rest tremor and postural tremor. His tremor may be a little bit relieved when he's doing some gestures, but you can see that it still persists. And some of them having difficulty walking as well. You can see this senior is walking in very, very small steps. And this may cause a lot of problems, like they may be easier to fall down. And not only limited to motor skills, it may also affect non-motor skills, like you may lose your sense of smell, and you may be having issues with your gastrointestinal functions and sweating. So this is also in collaboration with iBaba Health. So what we have done here is also a mobile platform for assessing Parkinson's disease. And the idea is that we want to do assessment with multimodal data. And it's also an important thing is that for clinical data like brain scans, it may have high accuracy, but you won't be able to go to hospital to do brain scans from day to day. Normally you only do it on a half-year basis or yearly basis, so this is high quality data, but you may not be able to get it really frequently. So the other type of data we are getting is from our gamified assessment platform, so this can help us to collect cognitive and motor and behavioral longitudinal database, because they can do it on a more day-to-day basis. And then we'll use that for analysis. So we basically will combine these two types of data, so both clinical data and the behavioral data that we are collecting on our platforms. So these are some of the mini games. So basically each of them is really assessing one type of symptoms related to Parkinson's disease. Let me just show you a quick one. This is an alternative tapping test. So it's related to your finger coordination and so on. And this one is where we are testing their rest tremor. So they rest the mobile phone on their lap, and it looks like a tree, but actually we are trying to detect their tremor, their rest tremor. So after it finishes, we can analyze the frequency and amplitude of their tremor. And this is the same for another tremor test, but this is for postural tremor. So again, we analyze the frequency and amplitude. So this one is for assessing the micrographia symptoms. Because you saw just now the patient, they walk in very small steps. And some of the Parkinson's disease patients, they also have the tendency to write in smaller and smaller fonts and draw smaller and smaller circles. And this one is on hand coordination, whether you can clear the two trails at the same time, so it's a hand coordination assessment. So basically with this, then we are collecting various type of features. So one thing good about digital data is that it can give you the fidelity where human observation or clinical assessment may not be able to achieve. So traditionally, those type of tests are also conducted by the UPDRS. This is a very traditional and famous, commonly used scale for assessing Parkinson's disease. So the symptoms that we are looking at and the assessment that we are doing are actually partly adapted from UPDRS. So you can imagine that when the doctor is really when the doctor is really seeing that people are doing the test, they may not be able to analyze what is the frequency of their tremor, and they may not be able to actually count how many times they have tapped. But in a digital environment, we will be able to do that kind of analysis, and we will be able to get that recording done very easily, because all the data is in digital form, and all we have to do is to collect the data and do the analysis. Thank you very much. So for example, the part that we are taking the analysis and doing the collecting the data, so this criteria is actually taken from the UPDRS. So let's say, for example, for finger tapping, we are looking at the number of taps and tapping speed. And for rest tremor, as suggested in UPDRS, we are measuring the tremor frequency as well as the amplitude. And this is one type of analysis we can do as an example to show you how we analyze the data. Because once you get the tremor data, you need to analyze the tremor frequency. And the tremor of Parkinson's disease patient are actually characterized by a frequency of 4 to 6 hertz and a medium amplitude. So what we do is that we apply Fourier transform to filter out signals that are specifically within the 4 to 6 hertz, which characterize Parkinson's disease patient's tremor type. And with all this data, what we want to do is, like, for example, there are many things we can do. Like with the clinical feature and the analysis for the brain scans, we want to detect their symptom severity. And we also want to do anomaly detection, so to possibly provide some onset warning for Parkinson's disease patient. And something else we want to do is to do disease phenotyping. So for example, we can use dynamic time wrapping, which is an algorithm, type of algorithm you can use to compare different sequences of data. So once we can compare their, let's say their trauma sequence or whatever sequence at different time points, then we'll be able to observe how their disease is actually evolving and how their disease is actually progressing. And that can help us to do disease phenotyping. And lastly, I want to end this talk with a little bit my perspective on, so what is the role of AI in healthcare? But yeah, this only represents my own perspective. So to be really clear, I actually do not think that in a very short time, AI can really replace human in all aspects. I guess recently the big news in the AI community must be the ChatGPT. I don't know whether you have the chance to play with it or not. But the sense is that if you understand what is behind, then you know that it has no common sense and not really logic. It's basically predicting what is going to be, what is the higher probability to be the next word. So sometimes it may be able to give you some seemingly reasonable answers, but if you really know how to tweak it, it will give you some weird answers as well. And if we are talking about more domains that related to professionals, like especially like doctors and lawyers, I'm not really being pessimistic, but I still don't think the replacement is coming that soon. Because for doctors, when they are facing patients, it's not only the diagnosis you are doing, sometimes you also have the interpersonal aspect, how you are communicating with the patient, the kind of a temperature you are having between humans. That's not easily learned or to be replaced by AI in a sense. And especially in some of the cases, our diagnosis accuracy of AI haven't really reached doctors' accuracy or the best expert accuracy yet. But maybe in some of the areas, AI, I have to admit that is already better than doctors, but it's just in some areas, not all the areas. So that's my general stand. But that also doesn't mean that I don't find AI is useful in healthcare. Otherwise, I won't be doing so much projects in this area. So we've seen that there are many applications of AI in healthcare recently or in recent years. And the ones that we may have, I may have showed you today, including my medical diagnosis, personalized healthcare plans, and also health monitoring and wearables. And there are many of them. But if you ask me to summarize what are the really impact of AI can bring to healthcare, then I think it's the following aspect. The first aspect is the accessibility. Because now we see increasing penetration of smart personal devices. And that's very important because if they are using smart devices, then we can deploy our system onto the smart devices. And what is also important is that the current generation of the seniors, they are not digital native, like our parents, our grandparents, they are not used to digital devices. But what will happen in 50 or 60 years when we get old? I mean, our generation is digital native. I mean, at that time, even though sometimes when we are doing studies or projects, we notice that the acceptance rate of technology is still not that high in our current senior population, but that's going to change. When we are getting old, we are more used to technology, so that's why I see more opportunities for technologies to go into the healthcare aspect. And the second part is, of course, related to the linked medical data. Now we have a bunch of data, and many of them are linked, and we should make use of that data to increase whatever accessibility of monitoring and assessment. And another point is really related to the democratization of healthcare. If you are young, you haven't gone for surgery, a big surgery or full body health check, you may not have the impression. But if you have a chance to really go to hospital and do a full surgery, or you go to one of the executive health check, you will know how expensive it is. So we can afford this kind of healthcare, then that's our benefit. But there are many people out there in the world, they don't have such benefit to access to very good healthcare. So if we can really give them this type of monitoring and assessment in a cheap way, then I view it as a type of democratization of healthcare and to eliminate the gap between the rich and the poor in the area of healthcare. And the other type is cost effectiveness. This is also what we have found in the study as well. Normally, to support a community study of 150 people, you need a lot of community helpers. They have to be there, like there need to be trainers, exercise, and direct them to do activities. But in our case, we can just set up the modules there or the devices there. We may need to tell them or teach them how to use it initially, but once they get on track, only very minimum manpower are needed to maintain the program that we are running. So that's also a very important issue, because if we have more seniors and we really want to do large scale screening and monitoring, it's very hard to do it just with humans. And then we have technology, and then that's where I think technology can help. And the other part is really important is that I think technology can help us, or AI can help us to provide a new dimension of data. Like I mentioned in my project, we can do continuous monitoring to provide data in non-clinical environment, and this data can be used to complement, not really replace, but to complement clinical data. I can just give you 2 examples very easily. So one is sleep monitoring. If you want to do sleep analysis in clinical environment, that's very hard, because they need to put like ECG devices and whatever devices on your body, and then you need to sleep at a place which is not your home, that may not really make you feel comfortable. But now if you have wearable devices, like smart watches, you can just wear it and then you sleep in your home, and then you can help to monitor your sleep data. And that's something we couldn't get without technology. And the other very good example is what is called the white coat hypertension. Because if you want to determine whether a person has hypertension or not, then they need to measure, right? But most of the people, or some of the patients, they get really nervous when they see doctors. So when they see doctors, they are nervous, and then when the doctor are measuring their blood pressure, they tend to have a higher blood pressure than they normally do. So that's what they call the white coat hypertension. So in this case, if you can measure their blood pressure at a normal, easier environment that they are more familiar with, then that may increase your measurement accuracy of blood pressure. And lastly, what I want to mention about AI in healthcare is really about early detection. Because early detection often requires continuous monitoring and frequent assessment. That's also the point of us like going annually health check as well. Because if you don't check frequently, then how do you know how your body's condition is changing? But sometimes, as I mentioned previously, with the limitation of manpower and also the cost for individuals, it may not be so feasible to do very complicated health check in clinical environment in a frequent basis. So that's where technology can step in, and that's where I find technology or AI can really help us to make the move to go from healthcare to health. Yeah, I think with that I will end my presentation. And I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I'll start the question from so I have 2 questions. The first is, when you look at the drawing drawn by the patient and then you rate it with your AI algorithm. So how do you separate it from the drawing drawn because of dementia, or because the patient had some other health issues? For example, because he's a senior patient, he doesn't see properly and he's not able to draw it properly. So how do you differentiate between these 2 cases?
I think firstly we are more targeting at the people who might have dementia. So that's the first point. So if they have some issues like visual issues, that has to be separated right before they go into this study or using this application. So for example, I can give you another example, like the one that I showed you just now with the laundry, where you need to select the color. So in that case, if the patient is colorblind, so they won't be able to do that as well. So that is part of the assumption that we are keeping. But of course, as you mentioned, if it really want to be a general and all-purpose kind of screening test, then we need to take other possibility as well. But currently, we are only taking the one related to dementia. Because as I showed just now, it can be used to show some symptoms of Parkinson's disease as well. But currently, our focus is only on dementia. And the second part related to your question is, how do we tell whether it's good or not, or whether maybe their there's some unintentional stop. It may be they are slow. So we have some clinical criteria to refer to. So maybe drawing slow is not one of the most obvious indication. So according to a clinical criteria, we look at different things like how do they draw? Do they have all the 12 digits? Is there a decent clock face and whether the time is correct? And then we also take a look at whether they're using any strategies. Like if you ask me to draw a clock, I probably draw the clock face and then I will draw 12, 6, 3, and 9 first, and then I go to the rest. So that's one part we are looking at as well. And also drawing speed as well, but maybe that's just one part of it. But most of the criteria that we are currently using are most following the whatever that has been established in the clinical area. That's one part I want to mention about interdisciplinary research as well. Because when we do the interdisciplinary research, one difficulty is that you are facing with knowledge and research problems from two different areas. So for me, like I was showing, one part of the problem was how do we do the algorithm to do the evaluation? And the question from your side is maybe related to whether the clinical criteria we are using is correct and can capture all this. So my suggestion is you need to focus on the discipline, which is your main discipline. Like in my case, my focus is on solving the part that is related to computer science. So the clinical criteria, I will find the relevant ones. I will learn what are the clinical criteria and how to embed them into my algorithm. But really, whether the clinical criteria are accurate and how can I improve the clinical criteria, that is not really my emphasis because that's not my expertise. So I tend to follow whatever that has been established and I assume that they are the ones that I should follow. Otherwise, your study will be too much diverse into here and there. Yeah, that's my suggestion.
There's a question from Lin Xiaohao. If he's here, you can ask the question himself. Okay, so his question is, how many researchers are working on this aging population field in Singapore?
So I cannot give you an estimate like how many that we have in Singapore, but I can tell you about our lab. So currently I'm affiliated with the Lilly Research Center, as introduced by Zhiwei earlier. So this center is dedicated on aging and it was set up in 2010. So in 2010, it was the first center focusing on aging-related issues. And currently, we have about 65 researchers, including faculty, postdoc, research fellows, and PhD students, and engineers and designers, and so on and so forth. But I think recently, there are more efforts or people coming to this area, like, ARISE, right? So ARISE was also established after Lilly and is also working on topics related to aging. And also there are many government inputs as well. Like our cognition project, the ADL Plus Toolkit, it was funded by the National Innovation Challenge by Ministry of Health. And that is actually a series of grant costs focusing on things related to aging population. So they have costs related to fall detection, related to cognition, related to frailty. So there are increasing efforts on this. But yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't give an estimate like how many people are working on this currently in Singapore. But yeah, that's the general idea.
So any questions from the audience?
So in terms of the screening, I want to know what is the percentage of the false positive rate. Like for example, a person might be a potential disease carrier, but the screening fails to detect. What is the percentage of the experiments?
Okay. So actually, you're asking about two different things, right? So false positive rate is one part of it. Is when the person is actually negative, and then we say there's something wrong with him. But what you are asking is actually the false negative rate. So it's when they're actually carrying the disease, but we fail to identify him as positive, right? So actually, you are right. You are partly right. So in screening, we are more caring about false negative rate than false positive rate. It's like you cannot let somebody who have the risk to sleep out out of your net, rather than rather than you get more positive and then they go for screen and they go for the full diagnosis. So currently for our algorithm, speaking of accuracy, the screening one for the clock drawing, based on the data we collected, but of course the patient data that we have is limited, it's around 80%. The false negative rate isn't that high, potentially because the patient data that we are getting is quite well separated. So the part that we are getting is like we will collect data from the patients and also healthy patients, but maybe they are not that well staged, like we cannot get data all from the entire spectrum. So maybe in the middle, maybe our algorithm didn't perform so well, but the data we get are more towards the two ends. So currently the false negative rate is quite okay, but also I cannot speak too highly of it because if really looking at the whole spectrum, there's also a chance that it may not perform so well. So it also depends on so how you can evaluate your algorithm or your diagnosis system. It also depends on what kind of evaluation data you have. So the most ideal case is, of course, you can go to the real field study and you can collect all the information. But in this part, the challenge part is if you want to really verify whether it's correct or wrong, in addition to ask them to do the screening with your application, you also need to get a doctor to diagnose them. So you have the ground truth and then you can compare. Yeah. I don't know whether that answers your question or not.
Because my concept is like high false positive rate should be fine because anyway it's a screen.
Yeah.
But I mean, it might be good if you can minimize the false negative rate.
Yes, that's correct. So basically in diagnosis or screening, we often try to minimize the false negative rate. So false positive rate is also important, but as you said, yeah, that's right. Relatively, we will give more importance to false negative rate. So if they are kind of like a trade-off, then of course we tend to minimize false positive rate more than false positive rate. That's right.
Hi, Dr. Zeng. Thank you very much for the talk this afternoon. It's quite interesting to see how you're using AI for intervening and also monitoring for neurodegenerative diseases. Following on the question that was asked previously, and also your elaborate answer related to database and all that, so I'm more curious that especially for the first project that you shared with us today, the clock drawing experiment, I noticed that you use your synthetic data set for training, and also you said that temporal information is something that you are interested in. However, I'm curious if you're using MNIST as well as drawings from Quick Draw on Google, then how do you capture this temporal information for training? Is there some other logic that you use to connect the visual information with the temporal information? And has it been tested on actual data sets from the patients as well? And how good does it correlate and give a good result? What's the performance on real data set as well? And the second part, I'm sorry if I can also ask that right away, is I saw one plot which showed with the second, with the ADL plus toolkit that you developed, you showed a plot where there's improvement in the quality of life and also improvement in the performance. Could it be factors such as muscle memory because of which patients are performing better because they're doing the same activity every day? Or are there other factors that we can also associate to say that it's actually doing good?
Okay, so those are in fact very good questions. Let me just get to the slide that you were talking about so we can elaborate a little bit more. So the first question was regarding to like, so how do we get the temporal information when doing the synthetic data set? So sometimes you know that when you write that there's a certain stroke, right? So exactly when we have the fixed data point in the data set, it's already drawn. So we cannot get the exact temporal information. So for that part, we use like an approximation. So let's say, for example, if I put the 1, 2, 3, 4 in that kind of clockwise fashion, then I will give the points an approximated time. So let's say all the points in 2 will be later than 1, and all points in tree will be later than 2. And then later we'll add some noise to adjust a little bit, but it's kind of like an approximation. And in addition, the synthetic data set is part of it. We also get some of the real human subject to draw to provide some training data set as well. So that's 2 parts combined together. But to directly answer your question, yes, in the synthetic data set, the temporal information is approximated when we generate it. And the second part regarding the first question is whether that has been tested with the patient and what was the accuracy. So for that part, we conducted a user study as well, but it's not as large as the ADL+. Partly because if you really want to test with senior citizens, you also need the certain approach. If you are doing like social or healthcare related problems, you may also face similar problems. So the issue is you have to find collaborators. So in the ADL+ project, we collaborate with 10% hospital and the community centers, so they help us to reach the seniors, and then we recruit the seniors, and then we do. But then for the previous one, the clock drawing one, it's harder. So we only find like a few tens of participants based on our personal contact. So the accuracy was, as I just now mentioned, it's around 80% accuracy. But yes, it's still a wait for larger scale validation. Otherwise, we wouldn't know how good the false positive rate in the larger population as well. But that's the problem we are having as well. Sometimes when you are doing healthcare applications, it's very hard for you to find patients to do that. Yeah, but to answer your question, that's very tested within a very small scale. And the second question is regarding this one, whether there's some practice effect, right? So actually, this evaluation is done using a separate criteria, which is totally independent from whatever exercise they are doing with our system. So the thing is like this. So in the 6 months, they continuously interact with our system. That includes our applications on mobile phones, tablets, and some of the devices at the community centers. But these evaluations, like this one for overall cognitive performance, is actually measured using a neuropsychological test battery created by 10% hospital psychologists. So this set is the set that they normally use to assess dementia patients and generally assessing cognitive functions. And so the patient will only do that at the first point when they involve, when we decide whether they can join or not, whether they fulfill the inclusion criteria, and at the end of the 6 months intervention, and also at the end of the follow-up. So this set they do to determine what their performance is completely separated from the part they are doing in the exercise. So, so we are doing it at a suggested interval by the psychologist. So what they suggest is minimally this kind of evaluation needs to be half year in between. So this one has half year in between. So this one has slightly less than half year in between because there's only 6 months in between. So in terms of using clinical psychological tests, there might be some practice effect. But it's also we also try to minimize that, so at least it should be 6 months in between. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Any more questions?
Hello, 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 first, speaking of this. Got it, hello.
I can hear you, it's okay.
Hello. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for the interesting interdisciplinary research. It's always very interesting. So I have 2 questions. The first one pertains to the validity of the gamified online tests, similar to the question before. But how do the performance on online gamified tests compare to the performance of tests administered in person? Have the test scores been validated against normative scores? The second question relates to AI. I wonder if it's possible to perhaps use AI or machine learning to sort of find a common factor in all the tests that you have administered, right? To sort of generate maybe different neurodegenerative profiles within the larger umbrella of dementia or Parkinson's.
Let me see if I get your questions correct. So the first one is regarding like we have two separate part of data, right? One part is our data collected within the games, and the other part is the clinical assessment. So we want to ask whether there's any correlation between the two, or how do they, so whether they match each other. Is that the case?
Yeah, so they are comparable.
Okay, so that is related to measuring how effective our tool can be in the monitoring sense. So basically the results I'm showing here is more showing the interventional effectiveness, right? So we have did some analysis on that. So the correlation was, I would say, moderate. That's one part of the issue that we are facing as well, because even though we ask them to perform the activities on a more frequent basis, but what we have actually found is that if they do activities like the same activity, they may have activities on a daily basis, but they are different activities. So for each activity, they may have data once every week, or once every 1 or 2 weeks, or twice every week. It depends on how frequently they go. So the data density is not as good as we imagined as we really started. So that's one part why the correlation, we didn't see it so high yet. And the other part is really because some of the seniors, they do find some of the exercise very challenging. So some of the parts, their performance of the test are also depends on how well they're dealing with the test. But I'm still quite confident that this type of assessment should be able to reach a good quality in assessment, but the confidence comes from another project. So there's another project that we do on frailty, so that's more related to physical conditions. And there was one exercise that we did was cycling, and it was a VR augmented kind of cycling game. So when they are doing the cycling, they're also controlling an avatar in the virtual environment. And then so we hope that they can exercise more. And with that one, we collect their average pedaling speed. And that was very well correlated with how they used to, or the measure they used to measure frailty in clinical measurement. So I guess why we can show a high correlation in that one, but a moderate correlation in our part, is really because the tasks that we are doing here are more related to cognitive functions. So one part is because the data density is not that good, and one part is because they may find the task itself a bit challenging, so their score may not really reflect their real cognitive performance. So that's one part. Yeah, but based on the experience in that project, I think we can improve that by redesigning and improving, and I think finally the correlation should be high. And sorry, I forgot the second question already.
So the second question, I think related to the first as well. So if the correlation across the tests is not consistent or high, that means that the test could be also measuring some different underlying cognitive mechanisms. So I was wondering, with the different tests and with the use of AI, we could also sort of look for a common factor across the tests, or maybe like the different factors. And in that sense, we can look at the correlation between the different factors that you may identify that underlies these different tests. And that might give us more information about how people with dementia or Parkinson's may actually approach the test.
That's actually a direction many people in this field are currently looking at. So I would summarize that one as another type of functions that AI or machine learning can perform in healthcare is like you can use this to develop or to find more hidden factors or hidden like biological whatever contributors or risk factors to the disease. That's a very important direction and a very interesting direction. Currently, we are not attempting this in our project is because if you want to find risk factors, those are typically related to lifestyle, genetic, and demographic. So we have not collected this data extensively within this project. And also, if you want to see whether the person can really progress, because if you want to make this kind of prediction, then your ground truth will be over a few years. Because once you make the prediction at this point in time, you need to wait and see if they really lapse into dementia or Parkinson's disease in like a few years or 10 years scale. So that's also one reason why we couldn't do this right now, because you need to wait for a very long time for the ground truth. But I'm actually aware of researchers who are doing this type of research, and in one of our other projects, we have such attempts as well. So in one of our other projects, we are doing things related to 3H, hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol. So in that one, we collect more data related to their demographic information, their lifestyle, their dietary information, and then they attempt to use that to help them to do profiling. But the profiling is also not in the case that being able to tell whether he or she will definitely have diabetes in how many years, but it's really to separate them into different groups, like whether you are in a high risk profile, medium risk profile, or low risk profile. Yeah. That's currently what we are doing, but if that's your research direction, I think that's a good direction.
Any more questions for the audience? So I think I have one last question. You said you have got these two modules. So one is on the local mobile phone and they're interacting with it, and then one is in the community. So when the senior person uses the mobile phone, there's a lot of data that is already generated when he is doing that, which could be used to train and make the AI model even better. So is there a sort of data flow that goes from this local mobile phone to the bigger AI model to serve as a test data?
Yeah, that's the part of the data we want to collect as well when we deploy all those information. So what actually happens is that, that's why sometimes we require them to have Wi-Fi connection. Because some of them, if they do not have like cellular data with their mobile phone, or they do not have access to the internet, and then their mobile phone won't be able to upload their data to our central database. So that's one obstacle we have faced in central study as well, because some of them, they don't want to use their cellular data because they think that's costly, but they also don't have Wi-Fi at home. So at the end, we have to set up Wi-Fi routers at the community centers. So whenever they go, they can connect to the Wi-Fi, and then all the data can be uploaded. And yes, of course, that's one part of the data. We call it the behavioral data as well. And we collect all information, like the one you saw for the Parkinson's disease. So all the strokes they're drawing and how they have drawn that, all the dots and the timestamp, we have taken that down for analysis. So that's how we can analyze tremor frequency and amplitude, and their drawing speed and angular speed as well, because we are using that data collected on mobile phone.
Any more questions? If not, I think we have a last slide for the QR code. Please scan the QR code. So please scan the QR code for survey and attendance, and there will be light refreshment just outside. Okay, so there is light refreshment just outside. Once you're done scanning, please join us then. Okay. And finally, thank you, Doctor, for a wonderful talk, very, very engaging. And I think most of us were really involved in the talk. You can see from the questions. So thank you again for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Just one last word. I'm really happy for your invitation, because I do think it's important to have an opportunity to share with students that, especially you are doing interdisciplinary research. So from time to time, you may really find that's a difficult thing, because if you're doing interdisciplinary research, you have to learn things from both sides. Like for me, I didn't know about dementia and anything related to Parkinson's disease before I do it, so you have to learn a lot. But be confident. I think generally, now we are on a trend that if you really want to do something impactful, it has to be interdisciplinary. That's the general trend. We are going towards that. So if you are doing interdisciplinary research, I believe that's good direction, so just march forward. Yeah, thank you.